Ben and I are going to do a double act, sort of. And Ben Hayes is our CTO at Oasis, and he's going to start talking about stuff that we've been doing. And by the way, I should say that there is a good reason, sorry, there's several good reasons why we're doing this. In the feedback we've got from you, we always get stuff is, we want to know more about where Oasis is and where it stands, and we want more user stories, and that really explains the next two sessions. And Ben's going to do more or less half, and I'm going to do more or less half, but I'm liable to interrupt every now and then. Ben, please do.
Thank you. Yeah, Ben Hayes, CTO for Oasis. As Dickie said, we'll kind of break this up, but I'll give you a quick update on where we've got to since we were here last year, pretty much on features and performance and reliability, which are our kind of key drivers. And then Dickie will take over and talk a little bit more about the future and some of the bits around the side that we're helping out with as well. So features-wise, we've been working for almost 3 years now on what internally we've called Project Nazare, but more generally we're calling Oasis at Scale or Enterprise Oasis. And we've been delivering kind of ongoing features all through that time. So a couple of the highlights just from the last year there, we've got now full OED validation, which I'll come back to in a second. It comes into some of the later slides. I won't go through them all in detail because we had kind of 180 different deliverables that we've been working on. But some of the kind of key ones are stochastic segregation. So we do full stochastic segregation in the workflow now. We do things like post-loss amplification. We've just recently implemented a geocoding plugin. So we don't do geocoding ourselves, but we allow people to do that. But I think the point here is that everything we do is driven by the Oasis Technical Steering Group. So we have representation a lot in this room, actually, 12 different organizations that we meet monthly, and we give feedback on what we've been doing, and they feedback on what they want from us. So we're really driven by the community represented by that technical steering group.
It's probably worth saying, Ben, actually, because I know I actually wrote that bullet, I think. But
yeah.
It's worth saying that, of course, the two things. One is the technical steering group is really made up of Oasis members and users. But there is also, we also pay a lot of attention, of course, to the model developers that we are supporting on the platform. So they too come to us and say, actually, we need this change, or we want to change how we're doing flood modeling, or we need to look at liquefaction in a different way, or whatever it is. So that's the other driver. But I think I might have.
Yeah. And we have a lot of kind of subgroups that break off from that technical steering group. So when we were working on stochastic desegregation, for example, we invited a subgroup from the main technical steering group, and we included model developers that were interested in that. And we get the people that are really interested in a specific subject together to kind of specify what they want out of Oasis in that area. And we try and deliver that rather than what might more traditionally be a software development practice of coming up with an idea, building it, trying to sell it. Because Oasis is really owned by the community, we try and deliver exactly what you need. Shall I move on? One thing I should say, actually, is that spreadsheet that I've got a kind of screenshot of there with the 180 deliverables and our progress against it is open. So if anyone wants to have a look at that, that's completely open. We publish it publicly. You can get to it from GitHub, but I can give you the link if you need it. So performance and reliability were really our two main drivers when we started this project in 2021. And looking at performance in the first instance, we, in order to measure our improvement on performance back in May 2021, we took some real portfolios with reinsurance on them, and we ran these kind of 250,000 location portfolios through 4 real models. So 4 of our model vendors that we work with gave us permission to use those models to measure performance. And then with every release of Oasis, we kind of rerun those to make sure we're improving on performance there. So these slides, we've got a couple of slides here just to show how that performance has improved. And I think, the performance was pretty good actually to start off. If you're looking at kind of 250,000 location with ground loss, gross losses, and reinsurance calculations on top of that. Back then, it varied by model, but it was somewhere between, you see a couple of examples here, 25 and 80 minutes to run those models with considerable samples. So we are running full Monte Carlo simulations here. So 250 samples in these 2 examples. And then we compare that to the most recent release, or actually one back now, we're on 128, but 127, you see those speeds come down from kind of 80 minutes to 40 minutes there, so about half the time to run that impact forecasting European windstorm. And the Guy Carpenter Canadian flood model came from 25 minutes down to, I think it's about 18 minutes there on the slide. And on top of that, we've been working on, beyond just improving the software to run this faster, we have been building a new platform which allows you to distribute the execution of those models over many, many small workers, which makes it much faster on top of that. So you can see the timings there go from kind of 80 minutes to 40 minutes, and then down to 20 minutes for the fully distributed version of that impact forecasting European windstorm model. And the Guy Carpenter one is down to just over 10 minutes there for the equivalent model for Canadian flood. We also allow in Oasis running of what we call a complex model wrapper, which allows model providers to actually write their own ground-up loss calculation kernel within there. I mean, the performance is still coming down compared to what it was. It's not quite as good as the standard because the kind of standard models that we looked at before were, we've engineered the software to work very well with those. We are still seeing improvements, and I think the performance is still quite good. We're just doing the final stage of our platform development now, which should bring these down considerably. But it's still pretty good. It's less than an hour for these very complex, quite hard models to run inside Oasis.
And if I can just add one thing. So we put this slide up, I can't remember exactly, at a conference somewhere. I think it actually may have been here last year. And somebody came up to somebody, and one of us, and said, yeah, but we don't believe that. That's like you're just making that up. I mean, seriously, somebody said that, right? Which sort of, to be honest, slightly irritating. Because we spend so much of our time trying to get the performance really, really good. And these, not only are these just absolutely consistent and accurate numbers of what we've been doing, but I feel like we've loaded the dice against us because we're running many, many more samples. I mean, I can't remember how many samples. On some of these models, we're running 100 samples.
I mean, the previous ones there were 250 samples. So right. This is running 250 realizations of the same execution.
So if you take your favorite large cat model vendor and how many samples do they run? One. So I think I just want to make the point, if anybody's in any doubt at all, that this software is absolutely fit for purpose and running extremely well, and probably one of the fastest platforms that's out there in the marketplace right now that can run multiple models. I mean, I don't think there's anything faster. I'm not trying to, maybe the new RMS platform I think looks pretty good. I don't think it's as fast as ours, but I may be wrong. The point is, it's damn good, I think is my point, and Ben and the team have done a good job.
Yeah, might disagree. I remember last year you said yours was faster, but...
That's not available in the marketplace, it's different. It's optimized for their platform, I think.
Okay, so moving on from performance to reliability, which is our other real key driver. And reliability is quite hard to measure from a software development perspective because you don't know where things are going to go wrong until they go wrong. But our colleagues, Matthew Eagle at Guy Carpenter, provided some of their usage statistics from 2022, actually from last year. So Guy Carpenter are running Oasis kind of with all their models internally. And in terms of the numbers of executions they've done, they gave us some statistics here. So we're saying 2,613 analysis completed last year. They're running it with 60 users, so it's not just the R&D team having a go with it. This is a full production system there. 14 million is the total number of locations modeled every week, and if you kind of reverse calculate that down into the 50 analyses that are in a week, that's about the 250,000, which was the number from the performance slide. So those kind of numbers of now 20 to 30 minutes is per analysis is really what they're getting out of it. And reliability as the driver here, we got the numbers from them for how many of those executions of the 2,613 went wrong, and they said they have 96% success rate last year. So we've improved since that on reliability in terms of what we delivered, but that's pretty good. 4% not working the first time in production isn't too bad, and not working the first time means you have to go back and tweak something to get it to run again. Did you want to say anything else on that before I?
Nope, that's fine.
So that's, I mean, yeah, just very quickly, if you back calculate those numbers, 4% of 2,613 divided by the number of weeks in a year, I think it's about 2 analyses per week require some attention beyond just running through straight. And what we're doing internally to address some of those issues, even though they're relatively small numbers, we did find that the majority of those 4% of errors were coming from OED files not being correct on import. There was something either not wrong in one of the files or the file didn't marry up correctly. So we've built now full OED validation into the Oasis software. So those errors are caught and reported very early in the workflow, which you know should, I mean, you're still going to have to address them, but it should be much clearer what the problem is early on as you're working. We've also built a piece of software in the last kind of 18 months called Camel, which we use to build and deploy very quickly automated versions of the models, which allows us to run tests, make sure everything's running with every new kind of implementation of Oasis with every model. We can spin those up very quickly, run a series of automated tests on every model that we have access to, and make sure that everything's right ahead of those models being released into the community. And that's kind of feeding into this continuous integration piece that we have, which is where we invite, as a free service for model providers to give us a version of their model that they're putting out there, and we can test those models with every release of Oasis to make sure that everything's right ahead of model providers giving those out to their customers. And we're increasing that as we go. We hope to, I said here, we're trying to roll it out all this year. I'm not sure we'll quite get there by the end of the year, but it will continue to go on. But it's very much our aim to have every model we know about sat on our system. You know, no one else has access to that. We don't make that available publicly, but we test every iteration of Oasis with every model to make sure that the results are as expected, and we're not getting unexpected changes with developments that we're doing. So very quickly as well, I think we've shown this slide before, but we do have a lot of deployment options with Oasis. So you can deploy Oasis on a laptop. You can run relatively small models just from a laptop yourself. The same software, importantly, goes into every version of Oasis that we deploy. So you can deploy on premises and servers. You can deploy in the cloud, which a number of people here are doing already. It's all the same software, and it's the same software that model providers use to build those models. There are a number of hosted options there. So we've mentioned NASDAQ and Exceedance and impact forecasting. So Elements has the ability to have Oasis inside it as well now if you're running with impact forecasting. And then the final one, which I think Beat alluded to earlier on, is Moody's RMS are now giving access to Oasis models via NASDAQ.
And I think that well, I think there's two things actually. I mean, I think this is a significant opportunity because one of the largest, I don't exactly know, providers of platforms and models into the marketplace has acknowledged that Oasis is an effective, useful, standard platform for, in this case, RMS, to allow their users to get access to any model that's available on the Oasis platform. So I think that bit maybe has some relative clarity maybe to all of you. The bit that I find that people don't quite understand is they're not entirely sure of the motivation behind this. And before we were happy to endorse what RMS are doing in this space, I had quite long conversations with Mike Steele and Sheehan at RMS and some others, in fact, to check what their motivation was. And essentially, it's about they want to be able to provide a platform that gives as much richness to their clients as possible. And they're happy to acknowledge that they're not going to be, the only providers and models in every location, and that there are other organizations, many in this room, that actually could be better solutions for their clients. And the second, so that's the first thing. So that's sort of nice. I mean, it sort of potentially has some implications about the development strategy of RMS, which I should say hasn't. I've had some conversations with them about that, but they are absolutely acknowledging that if they're going to offer other models access through Oasis and Nasdaq into their platform, that they've got to give them some importance, perhaps is not the right word, but a word that describes this in terms of how that happens. So that's the first thing. The second thing is there is a complete wall between the models and RMS. So RMS never get to see the models because they sit within Nasdaq, and there's just an API call that goes between the two systems. And they actually said to me very early on, before it was announced, they said, we want to make sure that these other modelers don't feel like there's a threat because we're going to find out everything about what they're doing. Is Oasis able to act as intermediary if they don't want to talk to RMS? I said, absolutely, and Nasdaq can do that too. So I think that the point I'm trying to get across is this is a really good opportunity for users of the RMS platform to get access to a whole suite of models while maintaining the essentially the credibility, if you like, of Oasis and the standards that support, which is much more than the open data standards, which we're going to talk about in a second. It's about the standardization of the software and how we do that. So I think it is significant, and I don't think I've got an official statement from Verisk on this, but I think in principle there could be the same thing, not done in this exactly the same way, I should say, that might be available for Verisk as well, but it's not really been decided yet. So, and we can do some questions on this in a second if people have them, but we're not quite yet. Ben, back to me now?
I think it's you. Yeah.
It's me. Thank you. So Ben's talked about the software that is, of course, at the core of what we do. I want to talk a little bit about some other things that we're doing that should have some importance. So one of them is actually we're not the only people developing software using the Oasis brand, and these examples here are actually ones that are funded and supported, or funded at least, by the Insurance Development Forum, IDF. And so the main software here is one called Oasis Explorer. Risk Explorer?
Risk Explorer.
Risk Explorer, yeah, thank you. And what that does, it's partly a training tool, it's partly a way of representing parametric insurance. And so it does some burning cost pricing within that platform. Some of you may have this yourselves, of course, in your own organizations, but this is, I think, primarily driven by the users who may wish to buy parametric solutions. And actually, I think really importantly, I did have a conversation with more than one person in the audience who's here today, and I said, do you think we should be doing this or anything else? And I think the feedback was, it's really good to have this as a sort of training tool, as an educational tool, but it isn't a substitute for those of you that are experts in structuring parametric deals, which requires possibly different software, different expertise, different algorithms. But this is a good way of getting people on that journey and helping them understand the sort of quantum of price, what size box you're going to use, what type of triggers, and match them with open flood data sets and around the world. So, I mean, I think that's a great thing, and you can get access to that, and it's being further developed this year. A rather uninteresting little box here saying Oasis forecasting, because we've had some early conversations about introducing some open source forecasting tools that again are mainly focused, and this again is an IDF project. This is going to be focused on countries that wish to look at forecasting combined with sort of the expected loss and other outputs that we get from CAT models. You really want to look at both at the same time, but this anticipatory finance and action that is a big part of how developing countries and donors and development banks in this space, they want to try and encourage that before, and then, how do you look at it on the long term? So that's under consideration right now. I think it's quite likely that something will be funded in that space. And there are a few partners that we're talking to that we're going to be working with on that. So, and other people can do this too, by the way. It's no just because the IDF have done it, others can do this, and we are working with some other organizations. We talked a little bit about, we've done some questions on the open data standards. This is the steering group. So as you can see, it includes some big insurers, many big brokers, many big modeling firms. Not everybody, other people could join. I think my one point I would have about this is If there's anything in the Oasis ecosystem that is the most obvious thing to do, it's to start using these open data standards. It almost has universal benefit for everybody, and I don't quite understand why some firms don't do this. I was actually involved with a conversation on liability fairly recently, where an actuarial group in the UK were basically saying we need to use some standards on liability, and I said, excuse me, we got some, and your firms, mostly have been driving this, and they said, oh, well, okay, that's great. Well, in that case, we'll start using them. And there's a very interesting dynamic on this, and I had some conversations while I was in New York a few weeks ago, talking to the two biggest brokers, and essentially my challenge to them was, I don't understand why a big broker that does many useful, good things isn't pushing this, particularly for liability. And at least one of them said, yep, we're going to start doing that. And hopefully that will be the case. And I've had conversations with others. So it's a challenge really to all of us. It's like, really start building the systems that can absorb this information, because there's some challenges that we're all going to have and some inefficiencies if we don't start doing this. Would be my suggestion. If you think I'm wrong, by the way, ask me a question, raise your hand, telling me I'm wrong. I'm happy to have that conversation too. I suppose the lifeblood really, in a way, of what we're doing is choice in modeling. And I know there's resource issues in this. The RMS announcement and some other things that are going on, I think is going to start reducing the resources required to run these sort of models. This is more or less, I think, an updated list of what we've got. You've seen many of these before, and you're going to hear from some of these people a bit later on. I want to highlight two things here. This is growing all the time. So we've got renewed risk of presenting later, and I'll let them do that introduction. I won't say anything. We've got a new cyber model coming out, should be by the end of this year, focused on ransomware only. And it will be free to use by anybody who has access to the Oasis platform. And what I think was really encouraging by the organization that's producing this was they said, we know an awful lot about ransomware. We think we can model it really well. But what's the point if there's not a community around us in the insurance and reinsurance community that has some of this knowledge? Otherwise, it's just, we can't do this by ourselves. We have to get others involved. We're going to give this away for free. And we want to produce a debate about how this is working, whether it's good enough, whether we should change some methodologies. So it's going to be we're going to arrange some discussions around cyber. Two other cyber companies have talked about putting the models into Oasis. One being Denexus, based in California, and one whose name I can't actually remember now. Early stages, I should say. Our starting point with conversations with cyber modelers are you absolutely sure that your approach has an event-based methodology that's suitable for any type of cat modeling platform? Because what we don't want to do is try and shoehorn a model in for cyber that frankly shouldn't be in a cat modeling platform and should use some other type of approach. So we'll see where that goes. Actually, I should say one more thing, actually. I mean, clearly there are other things we can do here. So we had a conversation yesterday with our friends at GEM about what we can be doing more about that. There's lots of collaborations that's been going already with GEM. If anybody in this room or online sort of says, God, I wish we had a model for pick your favorite country, and you wanted to be involved in sharing with the upfront costs and sharing with the approach taken for building a new earthquake model, just let one of the GEM team, one of us, know, and we can help facilitate other people to join that sort of consortium of activities, which is something that we do with Oasis. So that was one other thing that just happened yesterday. And then actually this morning I had a conversation with somebody who was working on a European Union project, looking at flood risk for Europe, using one of Germany's foremost, well, actually not one of, Germany's foremost climate science centers. And that's going to be available on Oasis 2, and it's actually a follow-up from a project we did a few years ago. So there's all these things going on, because actually you can take these initiatives and help drive them, and we can help find the community around you if you don't have the contacts that we have in abundance. And I think the last thing I want to talk about we tend to describe Oasis as being, software and its standards, and of course the models that go with the software. But it's actually also a sort of catalyst for innovation. And so I've got a few things here talk about. Well, I've sort of talked about the model, so I'm not going to go over that again. We are jointly with the Insurance Development Forum going to be producing a global exposure model or industry exposure model, but it's also going to be economic, that will serve a dual purpose of dealing with developing countries, which obviously is the IDF's main function, but also dealing with the insurance and reinsurance industry's needs. Because, again, it's an example of inefficiency. There are all sorts of things going on around the world, and the plan is not only to make sure that we capture the needs of people like you in this room and online, and of course the developing countries as well, but also to engage with people like Google and Microsoft and Facebook and some others, all of which who have pushed into this space to some degree, but not to the standards that we think make sense. So we're going to try and create an organizational entity, maybe curated later on by Perils, because to me at least that would make entire sense, because that's their expertise. And I think it's important sometimes that organizations like us and Perils and GEM, all of us that actually are trying to help this community develop better, sort of pick our areas of expertise and then run that. So I wouldn't personally want to develop another organization to maintain exposure data. Why would we do that? Doesn't make much sense. And then the last thing that I frequently, everybody I talk to, I talked about how this is a revolution in our business. This, if you like, is the, and I say this, I sit on the steering board of this organization called Big Ticket, and I've just stuck a slide up here. They spoke here last year. Big Ticket has been launched this year, which is the difference between now and then. What Big Ticket does, for those of you, many of you won't know, is it acts as a curator, if you like, or it's not really a curator, it's a pipeline between the exposure data that they are helping the risk managers and the corporates collect, and with banking level permissioning, pass it through insurance broker, insurance company, reinsurance broker, reinsurance company, or possibly actually anybody else. Multiple players in this space, including the corporates themselves, of course, but brokers critically. So at the launch, I was on a panel with some of the organizations that were involved in that launch, which included Aviva, big insurance company many of you will know in the UK, and an Aon actually, who have decided that they're going to back this, and many other brokers are behind it. And I think it's a combination of this MasterCard spin-off, actually what it is, trusted platform with consistent exposure data in OED format, where you can run Oasis models, is absolutely a game changer and will really make the relationships between an insurance broker and their client so much easier. Not a conversation about when we got the data done, when we passed it to an insurer, when they've cleaned it up, when they've done some initial pricing work, then we're going to come back to you and talk about what you think we should be buying. You can get API instant pricing, and it's going to just so change how we do our business. And I think that is this is the sort of the Tesla of the insurance industry. And the good news is you're in there at the beginning, and you can actually roll this out in your organizations if you start embracing it. And we can maybe talk later on about how that's going to work.